All right, I had a little error with the recording. I must have missed part of it, but I'm back to this recording of painting Martin Luther here on Reformation Day, the 500th anniversary. And like I was saying, Martin Luther unwittingly started the Reformation. He wasn't attempting to create a big schism, but that's inevitably what happened. Basically, when he nailed the 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg, it was just a scholarly debate. And that's something that somebody in his position would have done very often. He was a professor, and he protested to the abuses within the Catholic Church at that time. There's a lot of corruption. And that was something that wasn't well received. They tried to stomp it out, and looking back in history, you can see they overplayed their hand. And so with that, then, having excommunicated Luther, he had no other choice but to start his own church. And that's what he in fact did. And so he, of course, espoused the idea of the five solas. We're saved by Scripture alone, by the revelation of Scripture alone, and then we're saved by grace through faith, and we're saved by Christ alone, to the glory of God alone. And these are things we take for granted now if we're Christians within a local church. But the other thing too is that much of our history is founded upon these principles. Our Western worldview of freedom and democracy is founded on the Protestant Reformation. And so that's really something I think that we should keep in mind in everything, is that there's a start to many different things within history. Now what I'm doing is just getting a color that I can use for his clothing. I want something that has a little bit of vibrance to it. Just kind of block that in here. Just block in these colors really quick. I'll grab a smaller brush, and we'll just begin to develop some of these other colors going on here as well. Get in some of the wrinkles of his clothing. And what I'm using is some raw umber dark, ultramarine blue, and just kind of pulling the color down. And blending this with the reddish color I have to make sure that my colors are blending properly. And that will have something that'll work with the rest of the image. Normally I do this in a glazing technique. So this is a little bit of a different approach than what I do most of the time, but it's kind of fun just to loosen up and paint something a little quicker, have some fun with it, see what happens within an alla prima kind of a setting. Just build these colors one on top of the other, and then try to get this Bible in there, or whatever that is. I believe that's what it is. Block in the shape of his fingers really quick. And we'll block in the area under his chin, since in the painting or in the image he's looking upward, or you're seeing him from below. You want to have that in there. Now, he wouldn't have had that kind of monkish haircut, where he's bald and has the ring of hair going around. That he wouldn't have had, because at this point he was fully separated from the Catholic Church. And so that would have been unnecessary to have that sort of a haircut. All right, now I'm going to get some of the facial features in. And this is the tricky part, is determining where to put those different features, how they're going to line up. That remains to be seen. All I know is I have the picture next to me, and I've got to make it look like that as much as possible. So eventually, if I don't give up, it should be able to all come together. Question is how long will it take to come together? Well, Rome wasn't built in a day. So something like this, I have to give it a certain amount of time as well to come together. Use a little bit of white and just kind of mix that together and make a flesh tone here. You get that furrowed brow ridge there and part of the nose. I just use a little bit of white and raw sienna for the highlighted area of the flesh tone. The flesh tones are very subjective. They depend on, the light outside, whether you have daylight or interior light, whether you're talking about the highlighted area or the area in shadow. All those different things can change a flesh tone. And so keeping all of that in mind as I do this image, I think he would be outside in this particular setting. So I want to make the flesh tone cool enough then for that purpose. So I'm grabbing some white and some naphtha crimson here for some of the highlighted areas of his flesh tone. And just slowly blocking it in. I'll probably have to switch to a smaller brush once I get enough color down I'm satisfied with. Get some brown tone here for his hair. And we could maybe believe he's got some sort of a white undergarment under here. It's hard to say exactly what it would be. I'm just looking at some of the detail and seeing what we might have. Suggesting that maybe there's a shadow. Maybe there's a shadow coming from his neck and chin area, onto his clothing. If this Bible has white pages, then the shadow should be bluish because there's the outside sky, and that would be blue. So we're going to suggest that idea. And just kind of blend this out. I don't want to have just a white page, but I'd like it to be kind of interesting. Have some texture on it. I'm going to make this side darker than the other because that's what I see in my image. Get some different colors in there just to make it interesting. And I probably could get even a little darker than this. Because the darker you make your dark values, the brighter the light values will look in comparison. You can get some good contrast then that way. And I would just wipe off some of the excess paint so I can blend it into what's already on there. Spray down my palette and keep everything nice and damp. Now, I'll take this smaller brush and work with that. All right. Get some shadows going over from his fingers. Let's use a slightly larger brush so I can get a little more ground covered with it. Let's see if I can get some detail within his facial features. He kind of had a particular look, and I think he had enough portraits painted of him that nobody really has any doubt as to what he looked like. This was at the beginning of the Renaissance, and at that time, realistic portraiture really was gaining new ground, and there are many artists that were able to capture a likeness accurately. So there are depictions of Luther when he was a young man, when he was middle-aged, and he died relatively young. I can't remember how old he was. I think maybe in his 50s. I'll have to look that up, but he didn't live to be of a very old age. And anyway, so again, they were able to capture some good likenesses of him that the sculptor used, for this particular sculpture that I'm basing my painting on. Get some of his nostrils in there. So we don't want to over define them, but just enough. And get the shadow coming from this side, because we see the light is stronger on the left side of the face, so I want to make sure I reiterate that. There's, I guess, also a secondary light source as well. I want to make sure I have his eyes wide enough. Let's see if I can get some blending going on this side of the face. There was a secondary light source, which would be probably, I'd imagine it might be lighter blue. Just kind of suggest that in there. That the sun maybe is illuminating his face on the stronger light source side, and on the secondary side, it's just maybe the sky that's illuminating it. And just trying to get a good transition between the lighter value on the left side as opposed to the other side. Getting in some transitional values on his chin. I'll use some cooler colors. If he had a 5 o'clock shadow, that would kind of suggest that idea. And then we'll see if we can get a little bit of red and a little raw sienna, just to get this idea of the cheek area and the thickness we have of that. Get something that describes the shadows on this side of his head. And thicken the eyebrows just a bit. And let's suggest that he has some protruding eyelids, which he kind of did. It's part of his distinctive look. Get a little shadow in here under his finger. We'll let that part of his face dry. Otherwise, it gets really difficult to work on it. Make sure his hand is large enough. Seems like maybe it was just a little too short. Just increase the size of it a little bit. And then we'll see if we can get a good transition here with his fingers. Can in fact show some knuckles as well. A little space in between the fingers there. All right, I'll go back to a larger brush and see if I can add a little bit more to the clothing. I want it to have a substantially different tone than his flesh tone. Let's already have some detail. I'm going to glaze this in. Let's already have some detail put down here. Make use of that. We'll cut in here. Another brush will get some of the wrinkles in the clothing defined again. Just a little bit further than what I had before. It's really kind of hard to do it all in one layer. Just want to get the general contour, the drapery here. Might not have it exactly like the sculpture, but that's okay. This can be its own work of art. Just lightly touching this. Although I know I'm not using as much commentary on this technique as I usually do, not explaining it as much as I do in my usual videos. That's just because I haven't done this opaque fast painting technique as much. So I'm kind of exploring here, using some of the things I know from my glazing technique and adapting it for this. So I'm concentrating a little bit more on what I'm actually doing, I guess. Use some ultramarine blue and raw umber dark here to really get in some of these shadowed areas. And it can make it very nice when you have cooler tones for your shadows. Let's just imagine you can also see the edge of this Bible like that. The actual page edges, we want to define them a little bit more. Maybe give them a little thickness. I'm going to spray the palette. Just sprayed myself. That's called being in the zone. I wasn't paying attention. All right. Let's see. We'll just add this part to the top. I want to thicken those pages just a little bit. So do that by adding a dark line below. It'll suggest that there's some thickness to this book here. Man, and I thought the glazing technique was hard on my brushes. All this thick paint really is really adding a lot of paint into the ends of the brushes. That's okay though. I'm just using very inexpensive brushes, so no worries. All right, so I want to define the end of his clothing a little bit more. With this being a sculpture, it's kind of hard to tell what's actually what, but I think he has a collared shirt here. Let's see if I can kind of define that. Let's see if I can get a little more definition on these wrinkles, suggesting his shoulder and his chest and arm area. A little definition in here as well. Well, I like that even though they made Luther look very heroic here, they still give him his stature, and he looks a little more portly. He's got the double chin, and they didn't change that. I think it's good to be accurate to his likeness in that way, but they were flattering where they could be with him without making it look like somebody else. Just what a good portrait does. It brings out the best features. It still, retains the likeness wherever possible. Using a blue and brown mixture just to get some of the shadows in the hair. Maybe I can get just a little bit of a secondary shadow here. As much as possible anyway. See if we can make it look like there's some writing on here. Make it look a little more interesting and engaging. Get some writing on the other page as well. Let's see if we can add just a little more depth to the face here. Just a little more depth. Get a little bit of the coloring of the lips. Just a little more detail here within the facial structure. Just thicken his lip a bit, get more substance. And maybe an indication of wrinkles underneath his eyes. And a little bit of detail within his eyelid and eyebrow area. Darken the nostrils a bit more. And I'm out of brown. Just a little more brown. And tell you what, let's have this finger go down just a bit more. Might be up a little too high. We have a little shadow falling from it somewhere. Then let's get the hair just a little more substantial. Yeah, just make the hair a bit more substantial. Try to get some dark shadows on the other side here. It's area not in light, not illuminated, I should say. Go back to the shadows underneath his eyebrows and eye area. Get a little transitional value between the eyebrow and then the highlight on his forehead. That went down a little too far. We got to get that darkened. There we go. And then there's a little here that can get lighter. Darken his nose just a bit. Grab a little more white here. And some raw sienna. That's fresh. And maybe just a bit of the naphtha red. Just on the end here. Oops. Just on the end of the nose. A little bit of a transitional value. And maybe suggest a little bit of the cheekbone area. Just get a little of a highlight. All right, I'm gonna add just a little more to the background. Use the white and ultramarine blue. Just kind of hit it with one more layer here. Just want that flesh tone to stand out a bit more. Just darken this a little more so we have just a bit more contrast. And I'll grab a small brush to cut into the smaller areas. Okay, let's see. Anything else I'd like to fix on this before I call it done? Just want a little bit of a transition on the values there by his corner of his mouth. And I'm going to get this just a bit darker in here. Extend that mouth down a little further. Get a couple of shadows within the hair. And, just a little more shading on his finger here. Just a little more of a shadow under his hand. Give it a bit more depth. There, I think that helps. I can add just a touch more to this part of the face. Just trying to resolve this transitional area between the hair and the cheek. And let's see here. Just a little more shading in this area. There's always a little more, isn't there? A little more a person can do. I like those cooler tones, though, on the chin. I think that looks nice. Just want to get these highlights described properly. There's just a little area in the jowls here that we need to capture. It's just a bit brighter. It's right in here. Not that bright. Let's just make sure I have the width of his eye socket area enough. And maybe I can slim the face down just a bit on that side. All right, I'm going to call this done and say Happy Reformation Day. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial here. If you have any questions, contact me at mattphilleo.com, or lately I'll be promoting realisticacrylic.com, covering basically everything on how to paint portraits realistically in acrylic. So have a blessed day, and we'll be in touch.